international trade. And the people of Yemen must be supported towards a political process for a sustainable and just peace. Mr. President, the Middle East is on a knife edge. Recent escalations make it even more important to support good faith efforts to find lasting peace between Israel and a fully independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state. Failure to make progress towards a two-state solution will only increase volatility and risk for hundreds of millions of people across the region who will continue to live under the constant threat of violence. I urge every government involved to use its influence and leverage to promote trust building, mutual security, and regional peace. We have a shared moral obligation to advance a comprehensive Middle East de-escalation effort in order to reduce risks, increase stability, and pave the way towards peace and prosperity for the countries and people of the region and beyond. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ziad Abu Amr, Special Representative of the President of the Observer State of Palestine.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President, Your Excellency, the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to join you today in this important meeting. I would especially thank you, Mr. President, for holding and presiding over this ministerial meeting. I would also like to express the gratitude of the State of Palestine to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his wise leadership of this organization, especially given the catastrophe that is currently happening in the Gaza Strip. I would also like to thank Algeria for placing the Palestinian cause as a priority on the agenda of the Security Council, including the membership of the State of Palestine in the United Nations. We would also like to express our thanks and gratitude to the countries that recognize the State of Palestine and the peoples of the world that believe in our right to self-determination in our land, the State of Palestine. We also thank the countries that developed their relations and that cooperated with us. And we do hope that these countries will recognize the State of Palestine as soon as possible, based on the principle of sovereign equality between nations and mutual respect. We also renew our gratitude to all countries that supported Palestine receiving the status of observer state, and the states that called on the Security Council to look into and consider the full membership of the State of Palestine in the UN. We also thank Arab countries and the non-aligned movement for joining this request based on the Riyadh summit. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the plight of the Palestinian people has started over a century ago and is still ongoing. The Palestinian people was the victim of events and international resolutions and decisions that were outside of their control. The Palestinian people is the victim of a history that is not of their making. This people has suffered a catastrophe in 1948 and the Israeli occupation since 1967. We are still longing to practice our right to self-determination, to live in freedom, security, and peace in an independent state, similar to other countries around the world. We have made and continue to make great sacrifices to achieve this goal. Since 1988, the Palestinian leadership, represented by the PLO, the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian leadership has showed preparedness to close the chapter of conflict and sit at the negotiations table to find a just, comprehensive, and permanent solution for the Palestinian question. In this regard, we have made every possible genuine effort. We have made unimaginable historic concessions in order to achieve a peace that is based on the two-state solution, to guarantee the establishment of an independent Palestinian state that is sovereign along the lines of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, in addition to resolving the issue of Palestinian refugees based on Resolution 194, a Palestinian state that lives with its neighbors in security and peace. Since 1993, the Palestinian leadership chose the path of negotiations, hoping that these negotiations will result in the desired solution. The international community supported the principle of the two-state solutions, and this position culminated in accepting the State of Palestine as an observer member in the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2016. And since then, the State of Palestine has sought and has called on the world to accept it as a full member of the United Nations, because we believe that an international resolution of this regard will protect the two-state solution and will reflect the Palestinian people's legitimate right to an independent state. However, unfortunately, some try to hinder the adoption of this resolution under weak pretenses. Granting Palestine full membership at the United Nations will lift some of the historic injustice that succeeding Palestinian generations have been subjected to. It will open wide prospects before a true peace based on justice, a peace that the countries and the peoples of the region will enjoy. In this regard, it is our right to wonder, how could grant and recognize Palestine, the state of Palestine, how could granting the state of Palestine full membership at the United Nations, similar to other countries around the world, how could this damage the prospects of peace between Palestinians and Israelis? How could this recognition and this membership harm international peace and security? This question, ladies and gentlemen, we ask it specifically to the United States and other countries that oppose granting the State of Palestine full membership at a time when they recognize Israel, which is the other party in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and has granted Israel full membership at the United Nations. And to those who say that recognizing the Palestinian state must happen through negotiations and not through a UN resolution, we wonder once again, how was the state of Israel established? How was it recognized? Wasn't that through a UN resolution, which is Resolution 181? Although Israel did not honor the conditions to accept its membership at the United Nations, and that is implementing Resolutions 181 and 194. Such a decision to grant the State of Palestine full membership will be an important pillar to achieve peace in our region, because the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in its different dimensions now goes beyond the borders of Palestine and Israel and impacts other regions in the Middle East and around the world. Therefore, we believe that it is high time for the Security Council to shoulder its historic responsibility to give justice to the Palestinian people by adopting a resolution to accept Palestine as a full member of the United Nations. Those who are trying to disrupt and hinder the adoption of such a resolution, they are not helping the prospects of peace between Palestinians and Israelis and the prospects for peace in the Middle East in general. This resolution naturally will not be the alternative for serious political negotiations that are time-bound to implement the two-state solution or relevant Security Council and GA resolutions, and to resolve what is the pending issues between Palestinians and Israelis. However, this resolution will grant hope to the Palestinian people, hope for a decent life within an independent state. After this hope has dissipated over the past years because of the intransigence of the Israeli government that has rejected this solution publicly and blatantly, especially following the destructive war against the Gaza Strip and after the reoccupation of the Gaza Strip by Israel. In this regard, the State of Palestine would like to express its thanks to all the countries that recognize the State of Palestine and sincerely and seriously supported granting the State of Palestine full membership in this international organization. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 12 years, after Palestine was granted observer status at the General Assembly, the State of Palestine played a positive and constructive role in your august organization. So we do hope you will give us the opportunity to become an integral part of the international community that is working to achieve international peace and security. Mr. President, today we are asking for full membership for the State of Palestine at the United Nations. However, this does not mean that we forgot what is happening in the Gaza Strip. This comprehensive destructive war waged by Israel against our people over the past 6 months. It has claimed the lives of over 35,000 Palestinians. 80,000 were wounded, mostly women, children, and the elderly. They have destroyed most vital facilities in the Gaza Strip. They've destroyed homes, routes, hospitals, schools, universities, mosques, churches, water and energy supplies. They have displaced the majority of the residents of the Strip. The majority of the Strip is now they cannot live there anymore because it was destroyed. Gaza will come back. What will be destroyed is the occupation. The attacks of the Israeli army continues. They continue to terrorize our people in different cities, villages, and camps in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. It is high time for this war and for these attacks to stop. It is high time for this occupation to end. Your august council, we call on you today more than ever to swiftly intervene and take the necessary measures to compel Israel to put an end to its aggression, to allow the delivery of humanitarian assistance to a starving people, to immediately withdraw from the Gaza Strip, to comply with international law and the resolutions of international legitimacy. The international community cannot stand idly by while a country is above international law and enjoys impunity. Israel shoulders the full responsibility for the great destruction that the Gaza Strip has suffered from because of its continued aggression. It is also the responsibility of countries that has supported Israel with weapons and funds, that has provided Israel with political protection. We rely on peace-loving nations to end this war, to end this aggression, and to provide support and relief to the residents of the Gaza Strip. Everyone must recognize, Israel particularly, that security cannot be achieved with endless wars as long as occupation stands. A peace that is based on justice, this will achieve security and stability for all. History has taught us that our region will not enjoy stability without the establishment of an independent Palestinian state along the lines of June 4th, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, to live in security and peace with its neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, an international resolution to grant Palestine full membership at the United Nations under these dark circumstances, and as the war of full destruction continues against the Gaza Strip and its residents. This international resolution would be a rejection to aggression. It would insist on respecting international law, human rights, and the right of the Palestinian people to live in freedom and dignity. This is the perfect time, ladies and gentlemen, for the international community and your council to shoulder their political, legal, and moral responsibilities towards the just Palestinian cause and the right of the Palestinian people to freedom and independence, so that the principles of justice and peace can prevail. I trust that you will stand with the Palestinian justice. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abu Amr for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished ministers, colleagues, Secretary General, how many times has this council met to discuss ways to advance the release of our hostages held in Gaza? How many times? Not even once. How many condemnations has this council issued against Hamas or for their heinous October 7th massacre? Zero. Zero. Yet rather than condemning Hamas's atrocities or taking action, real action, to bring our hostages home, this council will be voting upon a resolution to recommend granting the Palestinian Authority full membership status, a Palestinian state. How detached from reality can this council be to dedicate its time and resources to support a resolution so disconnected to the reality on the ground? To a resolution that will have zero positive impact for any party, that will cause only destruction for years to come and harm any chance for future dialogue. Colleagues, 6 months after October 7th, the most brutal massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, this council seeks to reward the supporters and perpetrators of these atrocities with statehood. The child-murdering Hamas rapists are watching this meeting and they are smiling. There is no bigger prize for terror than today's meeting. Let me remind everyone, the basic requirement for admission to the UN are A, permanent population, B, defined territory, C, government, and D, capacity to enter relations with other states. But, above anything else, a very important principle stated in Article 4 of the UN Charter is, and I quote, membership in the United Nations is open to all peace-loving states. Peace-loving. What a joke. Does anyone doubt that the Palestinians fail to meet these criteria? Did anyone hear any Palestinian leader even condemn the massacre of our children? The Palestinian Authority has absolutely no control over Gaza. You all know it. Everyone knows it. But even in Judea and Samaria, entire neighborhoods and cities are ruled by other terrorist gangs, Lion Den, others. And the Palestinian Authority, ironically, has no authority. So who is the council voting to recognize today and give full membership status to? Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Nablus. Who's going to be in charge? While this in itself is grounds enough to reject this sick reward for Palestinian terror, the Palestinian Authority is the opposite of a peace-loving entity. The Palestinian Authority not only have not condemned the October 7th massacre, they are also paying monthly salaries to all the terrorists that took part in it, rewarding the rapists. This is a genocide-loving entity that doesn't deserve any status here. But sadly, to some of the members here, the Palestinians' inability to meet the criteria simply doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because to some of you, Palestinian statehood has nothing to do with the UN Charter or legal criteria. All it has to do with is politics and interests. The UN Charter is important to them only when it can be used against Israel. The report from the Council's Commission on the Admission of New Members even states it black on white. Let me quote from clause 3 of the report, your report. And I quote, "Several members expressed the view that the admission of the State of Palestine to membership in the United Nations was a political matter rather than a technical or legal requirement." In other words, UN Charter be damned, international law be damned. I reiterate, international law and the UN Charter are only important when they can be weaponized against Israel. But if breaking the law means advancing the unilateral establishment of a Palestinian terror state, a Palestinian Nazi state, then by all means. They're just empty words on paper, right? What this council has decided to focus on at the expense of all other calamities around the globe is to grant a prize to terrorists. Granting the perpetrators and supporters of October 7th full membership status in the UN is the vilest reward for the vilest crimes. If this resolution passes, God forbid, this council should no longer be known as the Security Council, but as the Terror Council. The only thing that a forced unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state will do is to make any future negotiations almost impossible. As long as the Palestinians feel that they can exploit this politicized body to their benefit, why would they bother at the negotiating table or support any compromise? Do you honestly think that this resolution will make a solution more likely or change anything on the ground? The Palestinians have rejected every peace plan ever made, and they continue to support terror and boycott negotiations. And now they know that their rejectionism pays off. They can say no, no, no to any American president, but still get here what they demand, because the UN is guided by politics, not morality or truth. All this council is accomplishing through this destructive approach is making a solution unattainable. The UN is no longer about multilateralism, sadly. It is now committed to multi-terrorism. At the Security Council, terror pays off. It's shameful. I have always called out the political rot within the UN, that sadly nothing here is based on truth and justice, but toxic politicization. And today, the mask has finally fallen. The Council has exposed itself. Please do not give in to politics. Do not support this dangerous resolution. How can you support a resolution that is so destructive and immoral at the worst possible moment? Colleagues, the Council was not the only entity to expose its true face this week. On Saturday night, with the launch of over 300 UAVs, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles at Israel, the Ayatollah regime's mask also fell. Iran exposed itself as the terror state that it is. But today marks another milestone in the Ayatollah regime's blood-soaked history. On April 18, 1983, a Chevrolet pickup truck packed with 2,000 pounds of explosives sped through the gates of the US Embassy in Beirut, crashed into the building and detonated. This blast killed 63 people. You're talking a lot about embassies and the importance of embassies. And Hezbollah claimed responsibility. And today, April 18, 2024, exactly 41 years later, this council, the Security Council, will be addressed by an arch-terrorist whose regime funds, arms, trains, and directs Hezbollah. The Ayatollah regime's foreign minister, Hussein Amir Abdollahian, is a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. This terror organization, the IRGC, is responsible for carnage, bloodshed, and destruction worldwide. From terror attacks in South America and assassination plots on European and American soil to arms trafficking in Africa and terror sponsorship across the Middle East, the IRGC is in the business of murder. The IRGC is a designated terrorist organization, not only in Israel, not only in the United States, in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Both I and my Arab and American colleagues agree that the man who will address this council later today is a terrorist. And his presence here on today of all days is further proof of how the UN has become a haven for dictatorships and terror regimes to whitewash their crimes. Colleagues, it is Iran that ensured Hamas was able to orchestrate the October 7th massacre. It is the Ayatollah regime in Tehran that has provided weaponry to Hezbollah to rain down missiles on Israeli towns and cities. It is the Ayatollah regime in Tehran that has equipped the Houthis with cruise missiles to fire at merchant vessels. And it is the Ayatollah regime that launched an unprecedented attack at Israel, a fellow UN member state, less than a week ago. Yet, instead of designating the IRGC as a terror organization and sanctioning Iran's evil regime, the Security Council opens its doors for Iran's foreign minister, for a terrorist. Can you not see what is going on here? Terror Minister Abdollahian is not here to express sorrow for his regime's brazen attack and tell this council that the Islamic Republic has changed its ways. He is here to make a mockery of you. He is here to show you all, in your suits and with your diplomatic niceties, that his country can launch an attack on another member state on Saturday, and then he can come here on Thursday to lecture you all on human rights and international law. Minister Abdollahian's presence here today is making this institution a joke. Sadly, it is clear to every dictator and terror state that the UN has lost every ounce of justice, and it is now a blob of politicized plasticine that can be molded however the tyrants choose. And the Council plays along with this destructive charade. Colleagues, if you still believe that this body holds any relevance, then I ask you, I even beg you, what action has been taken by the Council against Iran for its attack against Israel this week? The foreign minister of a genocidal regime will speak here today as his country hurtles towards nuclear weapons. Has this Council taken any action to prevent this? Nope, nothing. Instead, we have gathered today to discuss the situation in Gaza. Has it occurred to any of you that the terror minister Abdollahian is here to make sure that you focus on Gaza as opposed to his own regime's crimes? Sadly, you are being spoon-fed a script. It was written by Khamenei and edited by Sinwar, a script crafted by terrorists. Due to Khamenei and Sinwar's script, terrorists commit acts of sheer evil against Israel. They exploit civilians as human shields, and when Israel defends itself, the UN will pressure Israel to a ceasefire and ensure their survival. The terrorists know that nothing captivates the UN's attention more than Israel. As long as Israel is defending itself, all other human rights violators can continue committing crimes. Your eyes will remain on Gaza as the rest of the world burns. And this is precisely what is happening today. You sit here focused, again, on Israel, focused on Gaza. We will hear talk of international law, human rights, and many other terms this council loves to toss around. But in reality, this council as a council cares nothing about human rights or international law. You even refused to visit our communities in southern Israel, and I invited all of you, that were devastated by Hamas. Everything is political and distorted. You know better than most that the Ayatollah regime is mere weeks away from nuclear capabilities. This global sponsor has proxies across the region, sowing death and destruction. But Iran has immunity here because this rogue regime has allies here on this council that protect it and its terror proxies. This is the reason why you will never designate Hamas and Hezbollah as terror organizations, despite the whole world knowing that they are. A war still rages in Ukraine, as the country that started it sits here on this council preaching about peace and the defense of civilians. This is a backwards world. This week, we mark the one-year anniversary of the war in Sudan. Millions have fled their homes. Millions more starve. Countless civilians have been murdered. Since the start of the war in Sudan, has this council held a single minister-level meeting on the atrocities? No, not one. But today marks the fourth Ministerial Security Council debate on Gaza. The fourth. 4 on Gaza, and not one on Sudan in the past year. The double standards here know no bounds. The amount of time, effort, and resources poured into Gaza makes it seem as if the rest of the world is a pure utopia. That outside of Gaza, we live in a carefree world. Hakuna Matata. The only people this meeting serves, and I reiterate, are Ayatollah Khamenei and Yahya Sinwar. Some of you may think that you are serving the Palestinians, but you're not. By holding this meeting, you are aiding Khamenei and Sinwar. They control the agenda here, and hardly any of you seem to notice. Colleagues, if the UN cannot prevent wars or defend human rights, it has lost any reason to continue operating. The day will come when this organization will be shuttered. The UN, as we know it, will cease to exist, and in its place will stand a body that truly cares about human rights, that truly fights to promote peace, that is capable of putting politics aside for the sake of justice, morality, and humanity. And when that day comes, and it will, this meeting and the vote to force the establishment of a Palestinian state will be remembered as catalyst of the UN's collapse. A meeting where the world burned, but all that concerned the Security Council was helping terrorists in Gaza survive. A meeting where a terror entity could be given full membership status. This is how far the UN has fallen. And this is why the UN, in its current format, has no future. I truly pray for brighter days, for a time where the UN can successfully combat the forces of darkness, not welcome them and be influenced by them. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my national capacity. I thank the Secretary General for his presence here today and for his stark and sobering brief. The Middle East is experiencing one of the bleakest and most volatile periods in modern history. As underlined by the Secretary General last Sunday, the Middle East is at the brink of a full-scale conflict, one which we need to collectively avoid by calling on all parties to show restraint. These latest events continue the downward spiral witnessed in the 6 months since the heinous terror attacks of Hamas on the 7th of October and the beginning of military action by Israel in Gaza. It provides further proof of the importance of an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza and the need to rebuild a political horizon in the Middle East. It is deeply worrying and completely unacceptable that this Council's demand for a ceasefire in accordance with Resolution 2728 has been disregarded by the parties. We wish to reiterate that under Article 25 of the Charter, the members of the United Nations agreed to accept and to carry out the decisions of the Security Council. Yes, Security Council decisions are binding. We have consistently condemned Hamas for its reprehensible terrorist attacks on the 7th of October, including the murder of over 1,200 Israelis, the taking of hostages, and any acts of sexual violence committed. The trauma from that dark day will forever haunt the Israeli people, particularly those who still suffer daily, knowing their loved ones are still held hostages by Hamas. We once again reiterate our demand that Hamas release all hostages immediately and unconditionally. However, in Gaza, it's not only the hostages who are suffering. Over 33,700 Palestinians have been killed, most of them women and children. Thousands have been injured or maimed. Countless others remain unaccounted for, missing under the rubble of ruined neighborhoods. The prospect of a further escalation into Rafah, where over 1 million displaced civilians are struggling daily to survive, is unconscionable. We stress our firm rejection of any ground offensive into Rafah and any further displacement of Palestinians. With over half of the population on the cusp of a man-made famine, coupled with a decimated health system, children are also dying from a lack of food and water. According to UNICEF, today in Gaza, 1 in 3 children under the age of 2 years are acutely malnourished. Targeted attacks on healthcare violate all the unique protections under international law for pregnant, birthing, and postpartum women, as well as children. We stress that all parties have a legal obligation under international law, including international humanitarian law, to protect civilians. In line with this, the provisional orders of the International Court of Justice on 26 January and 28 March must be complied with. Excellencies, since the beginning of this conflict, the delivered levels of aid into Gaza have been highly insufficient due to physical restrictions and bureaucratic impediments. Malta reiterates that denial of humanitarian assistance is a grave violation of international law, and the use of starvation as a weapon of war may constitute a war crime. Furthermore, we strongly underline that the safety of UN personnel, humanitarians, and journalists must be guaranteed. We call for Israel to both fully respect and utilize the humanitarian notification system as intended, and conduct an independent investigation into all killings of UN and humanitarian staff. Commercial trade must also be allowed to resume, as the people of Gaza cannot remain dependent on aid alone. In the words of the Secretary General, a paradigm shift is required to adequately address the desperate conditions in Gaza. Just yesterday, this Council held a briefing on the indispensable nature of UNRWA and its life-saving services. We maintain that the agency is a stabilizing force in the region and demands our continued support and resources. Turning to the wider region, the ripple effect of the war in Gaza, including that we have witnessed over the last days, is deeply troubling. The heightened tensions in the region and the increased escalations and skirmishes in the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen push the region closer to an untenable conflagration. Immediate de-escalation and restraint is of paramount importance. International law and diplomacy must be our guiding principles. In the West Bank, rising violence targeting civilians and intensified military operations push the occupied Palestinian territory into further instability. Malta stresses that the illegal Israeli settlements, demolition of Palestinian property, and settler violence are an obstacle to peace, violate international law, and threaten the viability of a two-state solution. We call on Israel to reverse such actions and abide by the relevant Security Council resolutions. We welcome ongoing efforts towards reinforcing and revitalizing the Palestinian Authority. The international community must support all actions which would allow its effective governance in line with the two-state solution and with Gaza as part of an independent Palestinian state. Fundamentally, a just resolution of this conflict demands a reality which embraces the Palestinians' legitimate aspirations for UN membership and statehood. It also demands a reality in which Israelis live in security without being held hostage by the threat of terrorism. The parameters of realization of this vision are well known and must be pursued as a matter of urgency. Malta reaffirms its unwavering commitment to a comprehensive political solution based on the two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as the future capital of two states living side by side in peace and security. And this in line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you, and I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad of Algeria.
أشكركم سيد الرئيس وأرجو أن تتقبلوا من هذا
I thank you. Please accept our deepest gratitude for the holding of this meeting today. This is a session which we believe will be a good step in the right direction. We are talking today about granting the status of full membership to the State of Palestine within our organization, which means that we are going to re-examine the Palestinian cause upon this solid basis, which means that we're going to shed light on the very essence of this, which cannot be defigured, cannot be altered, cannot be tested. What do I mean by essence? What do I mean by its substance in this way? I mean its historic and legitimate right for the Palestinian people to create an independent, sovereign state. This is a historic right, approved by the international community within this august organization 76 years ago. The international community is attached to consolidating this as a just, lasting, and definitive solution for the Palestinian cause. This is a historic right which has not been implemented, and the lack of implementation of this right is the cause of the prolongation of this Arab-Israeli conflict. This is the cause of the lack of security and safety in our region, a region which hasn't known peace for over 70 years. This is a historic right that Israeli occupation today stubbornly rejects and torpedoes at its very basis. Israeli occupation clearly and unequivocally rejects this and does everything it can to eradicate it. And it does this unscrupulously, with no qualms. Gaza, in its resistance, has shown the aims of Israeli occupation fully, whether this be visible or not, in order to liquidate the Palestinian cause. This is why this has been done, and to hinder our national project with regard to this Palestinian cause. Nobody is unaware of the fact that the genocidal war in Gaza and the suffocation upon the West Bank and the settlement and annexation policies upon Palestinian territories, as well as on occupied Jerusalem and the campaign of forced displacement upon Palestinian people, are continuing, without forgetting what is known as the Israeli arrangements following the war in Gaza. All of this are succeeding steps as part of a broader and much more dangerous Israeli plan. This Israeli plan wants to resuscitate and bring into being the greater project of Israel, which is to eradicate the foundations of a Palestinian state and destroy its pillars. Indeed, the entire world bore witness just a few months ago to what an Israeli authority did here in the General Assembly, holding up a map of the Middle East where Palestine did not appear. This was a map constructed of their hallucinations and desires. The escalation imposed by Israeli occupation is continuing on a number of fronts in our region. The aim of this escalation is now clear: to distract the international community's attention away from the Palestinian cause and to try to create new regional conflicts where the rights of Palestinian people would gradually be dissipated, or where the flame of the Palestinian cause would be extinguished. After everything I have just said, can some still allow themselves to follow the allegations by the Israeli occupiers and to follow their plans, which we have all too well understood, and we have understood the motive behind it? After all of this, is it difficult for some to understand the true face of Israeli occupation? An occupation made up of colonization, which insists on propagating and spreading illusions and undermining the security and stability of the Middle East upon the ruins of a Palestinian national project. After all of this, can some, even a few, still insist on saying that it is not yet time to grant Palestine the status of full member to our organization? This situation is dangerous, the situation facing the Palestinian cause. This council has a historic responsibility, and a decisive one. A decisive responsibility which is essential. That is the responsibility to act immediately, to impose the two-state solution and to safeguard the foundations of the creation of a Palestinian state. The two-state solution is facing imminent mortal danger. I repeat, the two-state solution is facing imminent mortal danger. We must save this solution before it is too late, which means granting the status of full membership to the state of Palestine. to safeguard peace and stability, to safeguard security in the Middle East as a whole. Any hesitation or wavering will have disastrous consequences and would give carte blanche or a green light to the Israeli occupation to continue with its plans. That is stealing, plundering, expansion on one side, and extremism and obstination on the other side. In this regard, Algeria had the honor of hosting the declaration of the creation of a Palestinian state on the 15th of November 1988. We also had the honor of being the first country to recognize the Palestinian state officially. As part of this historic legacy, which we are very proud of, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, from the tribune of the General Assembly during its last session, called for an acceleration of the process of granting the status of full membership to the State of Palestine within our organization. My country swiftly put forward a draft resolution to this august council, and in coordination, full coordination with our Palestinian and Arab brothers and sisters, and also working with other various regional groups in favor of the Palestinian cause. So the League of Arab States, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the African Union. The time has come to assume our responsibilities and our duties without faltering. And without avoiding or eluding such responsibilities, we must keep our promises, which is why we urge all members of this august council to support our efforts, thanks to their precious voices in favor of granting the status of full membership to the Palestinian state. This will achieve the following three things. First of all, it will consolidate the two-state solution and protect it from threats which seek to undermine it, destroy it, or even bury it altogether. Secondly, it will safeguard the foundations of the Palestinian state in the future, an independent sovereign state within the 1967 borders with Jerusalem Quds Sharif as a capital. Thirdly and finally, this will build the peace process upon solid foundations, which will allow for a mobilization of efforts and to respond to the needs of the Palestinian cause in order to restore peace, stability, and security throughout the Middle East. Nobody is unaware that such a step is a very simple one. This is what we must do, we as humanity, meeting here within this august body. It is our duty to thousands and thousands of Palestinian people who are being martyred every day, every hour, every minute, every second indeed, in order to ensure that their cause lives on, our cause, the cause of humanity as a whole. Justice must be served to the Palestinian people. This is a duty. This is a legal duty, a political duty, and a security duty. It is a duty at the scale of humanity and civilization as a whole. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Attaf for his statement, and I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mr. Renata Spelbar-Ček, Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. We find ourselves at a defining moment for the crisis in the Middle East and for this Council's role in addressing it. As we are facing growing danger of a full-scale regional escalation, we cannot lose sight of the situation in Gaza and the West Bank. I would like to reiterate our firm view that this is where the master key to easing tensions in the region is. I would like to offer 3 steps that can help us move away from the edge. Firstly, there must be immediate and full compliance with the Security Council resolutions and ICJ orders related to the conflict in Gaza. This should not be an ambiguous call, but a clear demand. All member states have the obligation to uphold the UN Charter, including through implementing Security Council resolutions. We condemn the attack of Hamas of 7 October and strongly deplore that the hostages are still being held in Gaza while their families continue to suffer in anguish for their safety and well-being. Families, homes, schools, hospitals, roads, and infrastructure in Gaza are being destroyed. People are helpless while their lives are collapsing, while famine and disease are looming. Women and children bear the brunt of this conflict. We all hear their desperate calls for help. We call on Israel to remove complex barriers to humanitarian aid and cooperate with the UN to organize a faster and safe distribution of assistance. We condemn all violation of international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law, and we call for accountability, including for sexual violence. The threat of the military offensive in Rafah, which we strongly oppose, is still here. In recent days, the situation in the West Bank is escalating. These are the fires that we have to extinguish before they engulf in whole region. We need urgent implementation of Resolution 2728, followed by a comprehensive political solution to the crisis. We believe that a ceasefire in Gaza would be a key element for reducing the boiling tensions in the region, including along the Blue Line and the Red Sea and elsewhere. Secondly, all actors and their partners in the region must exercise maximum restraint. We must diffuse and de-escalate the situation. Missiles and drones will not address the root causes of the crisis. They are not solutions, just the retaliations are not dialogue. Diplomacy is the only way forward. Thirdly, we must start and support the political process leading to a 2-state solution. We are of the view that the Council must do its part in the political process, and in its regard, we welcome the draft resolution proposed by France. We believe the 2-state solution must be based on sovereign equality of the states, and we therefore support the equal status in the UN. It would strengthen the role of the Palestinian Authority and would contribute to the security of Israel as well. Mr. President, all of us seated around this table, permanently or not, have a primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. We should therefore shoulder that responsibility with a clear commitment to stop this spiral of conflict, with a clear commitment to the UN Charter and international law. People in Palestine, Israel, and the whole Middle East do not ask for the impossible. They want peace and security and a viable vision of a better, dignified future. Let us all do everything in our power to make this happen. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Spelbar-Ček for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Uemura Tsukasa, Special Envoy for the Middle East of Japan.
Thank you. I thank His Excellency Mr. Bosch, Minister for Foreign and European Affairs and Trade of the Republic of Malta for his initiative. My appreciation also goes to the Secretary General for his briefing. Mr. President, the conflict which started with the attack by Hamas and others last October has continued for more than 6 months. First, let me express my heartfelt condolences to all the victims, including women, children, and humanitarian aid workers and their families. The world does not want to see the loss of lives and the cycle of violence anymore. Yet, the conflict endures. I sincerely hope continued discussions and a show of will in the Security Council will lead to a change in behavior by the parties concerned and an improvement of the situation. Last month, this Council adopted Resolution 2728, which demanded an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Japan has urged all parties to act in good faith based on this resolution. Japan takes note of the improvement to a certain extent in the environment surrounding humanitarian assistance, including humanitarian access. However, further effort needs to be made for a drastic change in the catastrophic situation on the ground. We have not seen a ceasefire realized yet either. Mr. President, countries concerned have made serious efforts outside this chamber to achieve the release of the hostages and the ceasefire. I believe those who serve best should be honored most. The Security Council must foster and encourage these efforts. A full-scale military operation in the densely populated area of Rafah would be a disaster that would result in many more casualties. Such an outcome is unacceptable. Mr. President, we are now witnessing an extremely dangerous situation that could have devastating consequences for the entire region and the world. Japan is deeply concerned about Iran's attack against Israel, which increases insecurity in the Middle East. We strongly condemn such an escalation. Japan has been urging the parties concerned to calm down the situation and reiterate its determination to continue to make all necessary diplomatic efforts in order to prevent any further deterioration. Further, the spiral of violence between Israel and Hezbollah is continuing, and attacks on vessels in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden by the Houthis are impeding the free and safe passage of vessels. Mr. President, to end the current tragedy and achieve lasting peace and stability in the Middle East, there is no solution other than peaceful coexistence between Israel and Palestine. To reach this goal, mutual trust is indispensable. Building trust is not an easy task. It will not only require time to heal the existing hatred and grief, but also a clear mutual commitment towards confidence building. Given the situation in front of us, it may even seem an almost impossible mission. However, Japan will not give up and will continuously contribute to the realization of a two-state solution through its own initiatives and efforts. And Japan will remain an escort runner for Palestine, Israel, and all the people living in the Middle East in good times and bad. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Tsukasa, for his statement. Right. So, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, We'd like to thank the Secretary General for his report. For 7 months now in the Middle East, the acutest possible conflict is raging. It's claimed the lives of over 34,000 peace-loving citizens of Gaza. The spiral of escalation with each passing day is being wound tighter and tighter, involving more and more countries in the region. For the very first time in decades, the threat of a large-scale armed conflict looms large. Today's meeting is an excellent opportunity for us to assess what the international community has managed to do in order to resolve this crisis and what it hasn't managed to do either. The first and most important thing is whether the Security Council demanded, as per its mandate, for the parties to immediately engage in a ceasefire. Indeed, yes, Resolution 2278, it de facto covered the period to the end of Ramadan, which is over. It did so, but it also called for a lasting and sustainable ceasefire. To get there, the Russian Federation and China had to veto the American draft resolution, the purpose of which was specifically to ensure that there was no ceasefire. Did the Council manage to control the implementation of this decision and to compel those who had ignored that decision to do so? Alas, no. This happened, well, did it happen because we didn't do enough? Such an assertion would be blatantly false. Starting on the 7th of October 2023, the Council worked day in, day out, discussing possible products geared towards ending the violence in Gaza. Delegations authored no less than 10 different draft resolutions, which I'm sure you'll agree is a fairly large number. As early as the 16th of October, the Russian Federation authored the first draft on the ceasefire in the Strip. It received a negative vote from France, the UK, the US, and Japan. The next draft was authored by Brazil, submitted on the 18th of October. The US was the only delegation to veto it, although it did contain, this is highly important as our US colleagues are now telling us, highly important wording condemning Hamas. Just imagine how many lives we could have saved if these proposals received support at the time. This includes the lives of hostages, the release of which we also demanded. Since then, Washington has cast 3 more vetoes, preventing the Council from taking a decision which would have stopped Israel's military operation in Gaza. Our American colleagues did not conceal that they view the Security Council as a stumbling block, which shouldn't get in the way of their effective diplomacy on the ground. In actual fact, they did this to give their main Middle Eastern ally a free hand to clear out the enclave. We remember very well, and we hope other Security Council members do too, that the US delegation demanded the deletion of the mere mention of the necessity to stop the violence from all drafts. Colleagues, every US veto cast on Gaza, it's not just another statistic in the SC's history. We shouldn't forget that it has a frightful price. It comes with a specific frightful price, the lives of thousands of peaceful citizens, peaceful people in Gaza. It took 6 months for Washington to at least realize that it has lost any means of influence over Israel. The tail is wagging the dog. Tel Aviv is dictating its conditions, demanding unconditional support from the US for all of its reckless decisions. Back then, in March, the US, which has been rebuked by practically the entire international community for all of its inhumane vetoes cast, the US tried to whitewash themselves, authoring a very strange draft resolution. In it, the US waxed philosophical, determining an imperative for a ceasefire without actually demanding one. At the same time, the resolution was chock-a-block with plants and mines, which de facto gave the green light for a further military operation conducted by Israel, including the clearing out of Rafah. As I said, together with China and Algeria, we couldn't let the Security Council to approve this license to kill further peaceful Palestinians. And thanks to this, the Security Council 3 days later adopted the aforementioned document authored by the E10, containing a demand for a ceasefire throughout Ramadan. Today, the US is disingenuously accusing Russia and China of vetoing its wonderful product. In reality, our veto was an example of why we need this instrument, the veto. At the same time, it also offers a response to all those calling for the veto's abolishment. It's necessary because we need to avoid the adoption of imbalanced and cunning decisions being promoted by Washington. Unfortunately, Israel is openly ignoring Resolution 2728 with the US as an encouragement, which actually rushed to call this Security Council resolution non-binding. As a result, we have a situation whereby the UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territory, Francesca Albanese, she's being compelled to recognize that Israel has met the threshold for the crime of genocide. She also characterized assertions by Israel's leadership about the fact that they're allegedly abiding by international humanitarian law, and also Israel's use of the right of self-defense and the fight against terrorism as pretexts. Ms. Albanese characterized these as humanitarian camouflage. I have a second question for you. Through our collective efforts, did we manage to improve the humanitarian situation in the enclave? The answer, again, is not in our favor. The Council adopted 2 humanitarian resolutions, 2712 and 2720. And yet, without a lasting ceasefire, these resolutions, as we warned everyone, remain dead letter. Humanitarian aid workers cannot do their job against the backdrop of active hostilities. These people are unarmed. Not only can they not help civilians, they can't actually defend themselves. We repeat that despite the disinformation being spread by the US, both of the aforementioned resolutions, just like Resolution 2728, contained measures for protecting humanitarian aid workers. And yet, without a ceasefire, they cannot be implemented. Israel's clear out of Gaza has already earned the dubious distinction of claiming the highest number of lives of humanitarian workers. Over 240 people have died, including 178 UNRWA staff. And this clear out is not yet over. The Israeli military is hitting humanitarian convoys, blocking access, slowing the passage of supplies. And yet, Western states are only castigating Israel for these actions if Western citizens die as a result. All calls for deconfliction, which are based on the goodwill of field commanders, are empty. They won't actually do anything to change the dire situation of humanitarian aid workers on the ground unless we have a fully fledged ceasefire. The last question I'd like to put to you is this. Did the international community manage to prevent a spillover of the conflict throughout the region? The answer is, once again, no. The situation on the Lebanese-Israeli border is highly unstable. Lebanon and Syria are being subjected to Israeli bombing constantly. Our Western colleagues, specifically the US, the UK, and France, are to blame for the fact that the Security Council did not condemn Israel's strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus on the 1st of April, which would have reaffirmed this sacred basis of a sacred principle of international relations, the inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises and staff. This resulted in a new, highly dangerous uptick in regional escalation. The consequences are wholly unpredictable. Such disdain on the part of our Western colleagues to specific states and their rights, their division of the world into us and them, the us are above the law, the them, well, their lawful interests can be ignored. This has brought the Middle East to the brink of a large-scale war. This is what you call effective diplomacy. This is what it looks like. The fruit of it, the fruit it bears this time, each time this diplomacy, is more victims and more destruction. By the way, another effect of this disdain is despite the clear demand of Algeria that we haven't managed to protect Palestinians from Israeli slaughter. We haven't been managed to end the spiral of violence. Not to mention the fact that since 1948, we haven't managed to help Palestinians secure a fully fledged state. The ambassador of Israel, in his statement, and in fact we knew what he was going to say before he said it, was disrespectful towards ministers from the region who are in the room today, Arab ministers and other ministers. For a long time now, the PR of Israel has managed to say awful things about UN staff, the SG, and today he called the Security Council the Terror Council. This is insulting. He forgot, probably, that the State of Israel was, in fact, established on the recommendation of the Security Council based on a General Assembly resolution. Do you want to cast doubt on this decision as well? Perhaps the Israeli ambassador will answer my question. Did Israel meet the criteria for membership when it was admitted to the UN? A short sideline about history. This is a letter from the chairman of the Committee on Admission of New Members to the President of the Security Council, dated 1948. It's a very short letter. I'm going to read it.
Membership Committee has discussed Israel's application for admission to membership of the United Nations. As a result of its discussions, the committee came to the conclusion that it was not at present in possession of the requisite information to enable it to come to any decision. In particular, it was pointed out in the committee that the General Assembly itself had not yet reached any conclusion on the Palestinian question as a whole. The USSR